Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shamal Mansouri, and today's talk will be Crafts as a Language. Please welcome with me the moderator of the talk, Chinasa Ezugha, Assistant Arts Professor of Live Art at New York University, and our speakers, Meherunnisa Asad, 81 design artist, Sara Al Khayyal, 1971 design artist, and Ayesha Hadhir, ADMAF artist.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So today, I hope this is going to be a sort of comfortable discussion in which we want to hold space for these artists to share their work and talk to us about what craft as language means to them. So as we expand our knowledge of craft and its linguistics presence here and now, we are joined by three formidable artists who are all part of this year's Community Partners section titled Craft as Language. Before I hand over to Ayesha, who will introduce her work and talk to us more about her contribution to this section, I want to just share a little thought about what craft as language means to me, but also hopefully means to all of us as we kind of hear what these artists have to say. So craft serves as a universal language that transcends cultural boundaries, embodying the shared human impulse to create, express, and connect. Across diverse societies, the act of crafting, whether through weaving, pottery, carving, or metalwork, communicates stories, traditions, and values that words often cannot. It bridges cultures, fostering mutual understanding and appreciation by revealing the unique perspectives and common threads that unite humanity. In an increasingly globalized world, craft as a cross-cultural language is a testament to the creativity and resilience of human expression. It reminds us that the beauty of our differences lies in the shared ability to make and communicate through our hands. So I want to give Ayesha the space to open this discussion up and share her work with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chinasa. Hello, I'm Ayesha. I think just to go back a bit on craft, generally when it comes to my work, I've been kind of using craft, ever since I started knowing what art is for me. And I've been kind of, starting with not this, but I want to kind of talk about I started sewing and getting into the whole kind of idea of fashion and all way back, and I thought this is kind of my world and this is my craft, and eventually things started to lead one over the other, and then I entered, I studied at Zayed University art, and then that kind of shifted a lot of my thinking in terms of defining what art and craft and all means to me. I bring this work because this is one of probably the biggest work that I've done, which is creative directing the National Day 52 last year. And this is fully when I kind of took in craft as a language to be kind of fully, fully used for the thematic of the whole kind of event. We started with the weave Sadu here specifically, and we wanted to kind of tell its story from generations, from the mother teaching her daughter and her daughter teaching her daughter and so on. So kind of the passing on of craft that happens during the generations. And within this work, I bring this up because it's obviously my favorite. It's where a robot arm is juxtaposed with a young kind of creative to weave her story. So together they make this magic. It's been a whole discussion about what does that mean when it comes to the craft? Are we taking over, by using technology, are we destroying what the craft is? Or is it just adding on to it? So I think with that, the work, I do a lot of multidisciplinary art, so it's performance, it's installation, kind of multiple things. Wait, I'm going back, sorry. So this is kind of a bit about my previous work, just to kind of give you a visual of like things that I've done. And there's always like a weave kind of woven into it. So there's also kind of performance that I kind of add to the work to kind of talk about another layer of what the meaning of the whole work is. But for this work here, I wanted to add some renders because like this is also interesting when it comes to like, you know, taking the craft and using, you know, technology or rendering to become like part of the work. So this is the work that I have here, and like this is kind of the process, and it has not just one craft but multiple craft woven into it. I talk about like, you know, the mandous being the table with like legs, kind of the idea of like it being the carry-on for the craft for the next generation. And then I put this AI render of the carpet that is actually now woven, and a bit about the process, but basically, you know, I fed the AI to kind of look into designing a carpet using, you know, like gargour or like the fishnets of the UAE, and like, you know, for using technology to kind of start imagining how can we carry this craft take that into the future for the next generation to understand what that is. And then this is kind of like a bit about the process of like, you know, the weave and the weaver and the performance as well. So this weave, you know, I kind of wanted to also innovate in the idea of the threads that's used within, you know, the work itself. These threads are made out of scrap fabric that was collected from the tailors, and like they kind of, you know, it takes an hour to produce one. But yeah, like we managed to kind of do it over like 2 months to gather all of these threads. But the idea is like, you know, to innovate in the material itself for the weaver, for the craft. And to start just thinking about like what that means for. Sorry, I didn't know that was like a sound, but sure. But yeah, that's my work that I contributed here. It talks again, like, you know, just taking this idea of like different layers of craft into the next generation. To you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sara Al Khayyal. I would like to start by thanking Abuظبي Art for the opportunity to be involved in a panel talk that speaks about language as a craft as a language, because as an emerging artist and as someone who is very passionate about the crafts that we have here in the UAE, and how can we really develop it and take it forward with us into the next generation and the generation after it, we need to understand it rather than just on a surface level of like it's part of our history, it's just part of the things that we have in the UAE, and really understand the craftsmanship that goes into it and the origin that it came from. And so it kind of like first started with my senior exhibition, where I really wanted to learn the craft of telly, but see where I can take it. And so I remember the conversation I had with my grandmother. I was like, oh, I want to work with telly. And she's like, oh, you know that I know how to do it. I was like, how have I never seen you do it? And so I brought for her the kajuja, and as soon as I put it in front of her, she immediately remembered how to do it. And that was so fascinating to me, because it was almost like a conversation that was stopped like over 20 years ago before I was born, and then she just continued talking through the thread, and it was very fascinating to me. And then through learning how to weave telly, and just so you know, telly out of all of the 3 crafts is the hardest, so please start with the other ones first. But it was very difficult, but then as soon as I started to understand how to weave it, I kind of developed my own understanding of it, and developed like almost like letters that make the craft make sense. And then I developed a pattern where it reflects the process that you go through weaving the normal telly thread. And through that pattern, I was able to showcase the process of the craft. I was able to showcase a different perspective to someone who might just see it as a craft that, you know, they usually see in like National Day or like Heritage Days. And people are always very intrigued by like, okay, but what does this mean? And what can this thread develop into? And how do other patterns can develop in other patterns as well? And I was able to bring the psychology of color, the psychology of shape, all of those things, and reflect it in a new way to speak about the craft in a more contemporary manner. And after the initial pattern, I wanted to explore this is the final pattern that reflects telly. And I was able to kind of like, again, put into the pattern, the look of the traditional look of it, and everything that came out of it is based of the original, but more contemporized. And so this is kind of like the garment, and I also wanted to push forward the application of the crafts on the actual garment, which is traditionally applied on jalabiyas, and again, really kind of like understand what I'm trying to do, develop my own methodology, and push it forward. And then after that, I moved on to my second craft, which is Safifa Arkhous. And I really enjoyed this one because it was very easy to pick up. So I start with this one. And so with this one specifically, as soon as I learned it was from my other grandma as well, and I kind of mentioned to her it was during the process of learning Sadu. I was like, oh, Safifa would be amazing to learn. She's like, if you just bring leaves for me, I'm gonna show you. I'm like, okay, let's learn it. And so after I learned it, I immediately started using fabric threads rather than the traditional palm leaves that was woven, because I practice with fabric. And so to me, it was something very natural of merging the craft into something that is contemporary. And I made this thobe last year for Eid, and I didn't really like think about it as much. I was just enjoying the process, and as I was doing it, I was developing things in it. I'm like, this has never been developed before. So it was a prototype of understanding how I can, again, bring the crafts into the day-to-day conversation and bring it to the future. And this is kind of like developing a pattern, developing artworks, all from the same craft, and really pushing the understanding of the craft that I have. I move on to one of the exhibitions that I did last year with 1971 Design Space, where Faطmة Mahmoud wanted to have a young artisan deal with Sadu and contemporize it. And it was a very big task, I'm not gonna lie. But I wanted to, again, understand what I'm doing. And Sadu was really the craft that is a proper language. To this day, I'm like, I can read Sadu that is Emirati, that is Kuwaiti, that is Saudi, and then other woven manner, because I took my time and I really understood the language that Sadu has. And so through this exhibition, I took people through the journey of my process of understanding the craft and then how I contemporized it. So it starts off with a piece that is called Loom on Pause, where I wanted to celebrate the traditional tools in a contemporary manner. And it's a moment to pause and celebrate the craft, but also to tell the viewer that moving forward, I will not create artwork that is traditionally woven. However, everything that you're gonna see is inspired from the craft itself. This artwork that you see, where the grid lies, 1/5 of it is exhibited in the Craft as a Language section here in Abuظbي Art. And this is where I introduced the grid, which is something that I discovered during my understanding of, or the research that I did in Sadu. And I felt like it's a very important part of the process that we usually don't see. And so that grid had, moving forward in the other artworks, is always there. However, it's always explored in a different manner. And so here it's explored in a 2D manner. The next artwork among the gridded stars is exploring that grid in a 3D manner using wooden blocks. And then I also wanted to animate it. I was like, okay, did it 2D, 3D, what's next? And the animation came from the idea that Sadu, when you read it, there is storytelling. There is a start, there is an end, and you read through what the artisan wove on the actual textile piece. And so this is kind of like modernizing that aspect of Sadu. And it ends with a Sadu frame of mind, where I wanted to bring all of my understanding that I had during that journey into one artwork. And when people first see the artwork, they see the complexity or that could make up one pattern. But then if they go to the side, they see that every single part of it has a section, and you see the complexity that can go into a modern Sadu piece.
Hi, I'm Meherunnisa Asad. And I head an artist collective by the name of Studio Lel. The medium that we specialize in, and the medium that is our technique, is called pietra dura. This technique originated in 16th century Florence. It then spread across Europe and southwards to Russia and South Asia. The most famous examples in South Asia of pietra dura are at the Taj Mahal and also at the Lahore Fort. The collective was founded by my mother, who also joins me today in the audience. This was a time when I was growing up in Peshawar, and it was the 1980s. And it was a time when there was a huge influx of refugees, Afghan refugees, into Peshawar as a result of the Soviet invasion and the war in Afghanistan. And one day, since Peshawar was a very conservative place, and it still is, one day my mother was going through an antique market in the historic city center of Peshawar, and she came across a pietra dura box. And because she was an artist, she hadn't trained in art, but had a strong interest in art and design and craft, she inquired about the technique, and she discovered that this was something called pietra dura, and the Afghan artisan told her that, this is something he specialized in. And so she invited him to our house, to the garage, and knowing very well that she couldn't venture out into a marble factory in Peshawar. And that's how Studio Lel came to be born, in our garage in Peshawar in the late 1980s, when she started collaborating with a displaced Afghan artisan. And he would teach her the technique, and she would give him feedback on how, since she was a painter, on how he could add dimension through studying stone, more deeply. So it was the beginning of a profound collaboration between her and the artisan, and that lasted almost over a decade between the two of them. Meanwhile, now in retrospect, looking back, I think it's really funny that most kids see their mother cooking in the kitchen, but I always, my strongest memories of my mother are creating something, painting on fabric or stained glass, or creating these artworks in stone. And it was, again, a passion. It flowed out of a deep love for all these different mediums, rather than a desire to sell the works and, to make it into a viable source of income, because that was also something that was not considered acceptable at that time in Peshawar, for a woman to be selling art or, doing it for commercial reasons. So I feel like from a very young age, those boundaries between art, craft, and design were very blurred for me. Meanwhile, I went away to study art in Lahore and then at Pratt Institute in New York. And when I returned, that also happened to be the start of a very violent time in Peshawar, which was home, which is where I had grown up. And although now I had returned not to Peshawar, but to Islamabad, which is the capital, and was relatively more peaceful, but there was a chain of suicide bomb attacks in which we lost family members and friends. And I thought, if this medium and these works can be, a way of putting out a different image of Peshawar, like a story of resilience and endurance, that would be something very powerful. So that's my mother and me, very recently working in the, creating a piece in the workshop that was shown at Homo Faber in Venice just this past August. This is me working with an Afghan master artisan, Ahmad Shakir, who we evacuated out of Afghanistan during COVID with his wife and 2 children. So increasingly also what started happening was that artisans across the border in Afghanistan would find out about my mother and about me and about Studio Lail, and they would reach out and, show an interest in, wanting to join the collective. And Ahmed came to us in the same manner. One day, my mother received a call during COVID from him, and he said, we're going hungry, businesses are closing, I know the language of stone, right? And is there any work for me? And so we were able to fortunately, evacuate him, bring him across. He had to spend a whole week at the border with his wife and children in, I think, under the open sky, but eventually he made it across. That's me again with our team of some of the artisans that we work with. So we collaborate with local artisans from Peshawar and displaced craftsmen from Afghanistan. And although it was very challenging living in Islamabad and managing the workshop in Peshawar, but I think that's a decision that, it was a very emotional decision, but one that, I, in retrospect, feel was so important. And I'm glad that we continue to collaborate with artisans in Peshawar and, displaced craftsmen from Afghanistan. And so typically now, over the 3 decades that my mother was preserving this art form, she was also innovating within the medium, whereby she was merging pietra dura with the Chinese cloisonne. There was cagliola, which is another Italian 16th century technique of plaster pouring, and lapidary, which is gem making. So it can be compared to, a garden of, techniques that she was like developing over a span of 3 decades. And when I joined the collective in 2007, I wanted to take that same spirit of innovation forward. And so we created, I imagined this piece called Beneath the Same Sky, Zeriak Asman in Persian, which is an artwork. It's a mural. And the idea was, again, to innovate within the art form. So if you look closely, it's almost like a collage in stone. And it doesn't follow the typical format of pietra dura, which is square or rectangular tile work. The stones that we use, again, it's because the stones are our palette, right? Just like an artist has a color palette, these stones that are formed in the mountains over millions of years are our palette. And because of our proximity to Afghanistan and due to the fact that lapis lazuli is a stone which arrives in Peshawar from Afghanistan, and then it is exported all over the world from the stone market in Peshawar. And my mother's love affair with this stone, a 3-decade love affair, it so happens that we create a lot of the works in lapis lazuli. So for this presentation, I decided to focus more on the works that we created with 81 Designs. And this was a wonderful opportunity to really innovate once again, do something unique, and push the boundaries of the art form. So we collaborated with fourth generation brass and copper workshop in Peshawar, and several other workshops in Islamabad and Rawalpindi that specialize in wood, carving, and sculpting to create two giant misbahs under the theme of interconnectedness. And that's my mother, me, and the fourth generation, the artist who heads the fourth generation copper and brass workshop in Peshawar. I thought it would be an excellent opportunity to showcase all the other wonderful crafts from that region. And so these are the two misbahs, Zaytoon and Nakhal. And whereas Nakhal is crafted in wood with thousands of hand-carved semi-precious and marble beads that were hammered into the wood. And Zaytoon was created in brass with Pietra Dura elements in serpentine, which is a semi-precious stone sourced from the mountains of Pakistan. That's part of our team, my mother, me, and the artisans, creating the misbah together, putting it together, weaving it bead by bead, and that would be a close-up shot. So the challenge here, again, as I said, since innovation is at the forefront of our practice, the challenge here was overlaying spherical, round forms with stone, right? So it was very challenging, and I'm extremely proud of our team, of the artisans, for taking up this challenge. And that's it from me.
You. So I want us to kind of have an open conversation where the audience can ask questions, and also you can, share more about your processes. But before I open it up, I wanted to ask a question about this idea of resilience and how resilience has manifested in each of your works, either through the collaborations that you've had, or as Ayesha and as you have said about innovating through also preservation, because I had the pleasure of working with Ayesha, and a big thank you to Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation for putting us together. I was so interested in how you have taken the language of craft and have placed it in an interdisciplinary space where performance, sculpture, installation, and also storytelling has become part of this experience. And of course, with both of your works as well, this idea that you're creating something that captures a history, a story about a place that then transcends to bring in other people's voices. So I wonder if all of you could respond to this idea of how have you also expanded the language of craft through your innovative process?
I think what was interesting about my processes, obviously one of them is actually collaborating with the NYU students, where we took them to study the craft with the craft women at House of Artisan, and just them kind of responding to it in the way that they kind of imagined, but also seeing, Khalo Afra, who's with us here doing the performance, kind of trying to, share that knowledge with us through her, there's a language barrier, but it's the craft that's kind of doing the talking. But I think it's so interesting to also be collaborating with her for a lot of the work that I've done here, including the weaving and all of that. She taught me more about she's refining it for me, she's defining it for me, and kind of giving me the access to continue innovate in this craft. And I think what was also interesting is like, you know, the students responding to the craft as well, like whether they kind of respond to it directly or like through their own craft brought into the table, which was also kind of interesting to do. But the whole idea of like the more people like we can share this with, the more we can teach, the craft is going to live on.
I think the idea of resilience is very prevalent here in the UAE from many aspects, and craft is one of them, because craft started from the earliest craft that I personally believe that exists here in the UAE, which is Sedu, out of all of the three that I learned, because they needed to weave homes for themselves. They needed to weave, it stemmed from a need to create something. And so the idea that that need is, in this day and age, is not as needed. However, we're privileged to have the craft and still have the artisan. It's just kind of like, it's up to us to see what we can do with it. Is it the idea of being resilient and holding on to the craft in the way that it was and just continuing that same language that it was, or really develop it in a way that we can create our own form of it and create and take what we need from the craft and push it forward, and just bringing the different aspects of the craft itself. For example, the artwork that is exhibited here, my favorite part about it is the fact that over 20 volunteers came and wove the piece itself, and to me that kind of brought the sense of community that the craft had in a contemporary manner. And so it's up to the artists and it's up to the people in the moment right now to kind of be resilient with the craft, but also really push it and move it forward.
When we talk about resilience, I think for me, it's just very grounding, very humbling, the interaction with the craftsman, because I'm just inspired constantly by them. And then one story about resilience, which I think was quite, that shapes our practice currently, is I think in 2010, when every day there would be a suicide bomb attack in Peshawar, and our workshop, which was 2 mud rooms, and it was literally my mother, me, and 2 artisans working on some commission which consisted of these elements inspired by nature, and we could hear American fighter jets, launching their attacks from the Peshawar airport, which during that entire decade was close to commercial flights and was being used as a base in times of war. And it was quite bizarre, actually, that we were doing this, creating these stone gardens while we could pretty much be bombed at any time. And then a few years later, I came across, while I was in the UK, I came across a book called War Gardens by a British war correspondent called Lala Snow. And she had been in 11 different war zones covering war, right? And like countries, 11 different countries. And I saw the title and I saw the picture of a Pashtun male, an Afghan male, standing in front of what seemed to be a garden. And so I just opened that book and, it really resonated, and that became kind of the title of a series of works called War Gardens. And I showed 2 examples from that series. And this picture of the whole team putting these gardens together, gardens in stone, while we, get a shot with a drone, has become like a signature shot. Essentially, the book talks about how in the darkest times and in the most kind of conflict-ridden countries that Lala was covering war in, she noticed that people leaned on nature as a source of comfort and solace. And since Studio Lael's practice is heavily inspired and always has been by nature, because my mother was also a gardener, and the garage, which was her workshop, was right next to the garden. So very often I would see her plucking a flower or a leaf and just taking it to the garage, to the artisan, and tell him, no, look closely, this is what I want. This is how I need you to shade the leaf or shade the flower, So that resonated, and I hope that I've answered your question on resilience.
Yes, thank you.
Because I just felt that one way of showing it is through the design language or symbolism of the Afghan war rugs is very interesting, and it's like these tanks and bullets and woven into rugs. But I thought that, okay, if we could talk about conflict and pain and war, yet through creating these works of beauty, and these gardens in stone, that would resonate globally, So yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts that they want to share?
Thank you so much for your presentation. I had a question for Ms. Asad. Am I saying that correctly? Yes. Sorry about that. One of your work included lapis lazuli, and that particular material comes from a very specific region in the world and has a lot of significance historically. So I'm wondering, why use that material? What does that mean to you, and what does it mean in modern-day Pakistan?
So on a personal level, it is a stone that I pretty much grew up with in my home. As I kind of spoke about that during my presentation, my mother developed this deep love affair with the stone because we lived in Peshawar, and as I mentioned, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan first comes to Peshawar, where there's a stone market where it arrives by the tons, and then it's exported globally from that stone market. It's sourced by designers and artists and jewelry makers, So on a personal level, that, and on the more conceptual level where work is concerned, because we collaborate with Afghan craftsmen, they really know lapis lazuli amongst many other stones. It's interesting, each stone, I feel, also has a different way you need to handle it based on its hardness, right? And so because lapis is sourced from Afghanistan, many of the Afghan artisans we work with are very fluent in the use of lapis lazuli. It's of course a really unique and precious stone, and has been used since ancient Egypt, and has fascinated different parts of the world and civilizations because of its color, and because the Afghan artisans have such a deep connection with the stone as well. So there's multiple reasons. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else?
Hi, I'd like to ask Ayesha and Sara about the role of transmission of the traditional crafts here, and what, in their opinion, is important in the younger generation of artists and designers acquiring these skills?
I think as a young artist myself, I like the idea of not conforming to something. So when I first tackle any topic that I work with in my personal art, I try to come at it from a point of view of like, okay, I'm not part of this culture. How will I tackle it? And that gives me a different perspective and allows me to be okay with not knowing a part of it. And it's something that I know that a lot of artists struggle with, because you would feel like you can't admit to saying like you don't know something, like you're supposed to know it, especially with our traditional craft. And so for me personally, whenever I meet an artist who just started working with crafts, I would always recommend that they learn it themselves, and they can really get the idea of the craft and develop, again, their own way of speaking through it, rather than just like taking it at face value and then applying it, because then that opens up a whole other narrative in artworks. But it's more fascinating to see how each one interprets the craft itself through learning it.
I tried learning a craft like years ago. I just don't know the mechanical of like how to twist and turn. It's just not how my brain works. So it's like very unfortunate that I can't actually, learn the know-how. There's so much math that goes into it that like, I just, it becomes too much. But random, but today actually, before coming here, I was teaching my son how to use the sewing machine. Because we have Teddy at home and we wanted to make him a Kandora, so he's here. But like, it's just kind of like, allowing like, the practice of like whatever, we have a kajuja as well. Like, so like just to have it around and like be accessible for like one day to kind of, as a reminder, as something that I want to kind of always use and becomes like part of our daily lives. It's very important. If we're not learning it, then who will? So, yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions or thoughts? Okay.
Hi, yes, my question's for Ayesha and Sara. So you both spoke about this idea of making sadhu and this idea of making it contemporary. Why is there such an emphasis to make a traditional practice a contemporary one in a way?
For me, I think it's because that's how it will be kind of understood for the next generation. When you stick to like some sort, like one tradition, you want to kind of innovate and like for it to be interesting and something that people could like, take forward. So it's not practiced the same way. Like sadhu was used for tents and now it's used for decorational elements. So how can we kind of continue innovating within the application of the material itself? That's for me.
I think I also kind of like agree, and as I mentioned, the idea to innovate and contemporize is because the crafts traditionally stemmed from a need. It stemmed from a specific usage of the craft, and then like for example, sadhu, during the research that I did, I understood that it was used for a very specific reason. The patterns that existed stopped at a level because artisan would learn it from the other artisan and then it would stop at that. And so there was a very clear gap with the shapes of the patterns, and it kind of like made me feel, or made me question, what if it continued? How will it look like? If we were to learn it, or my mother were to learn it, and then my grandmother's generation, like they knew it. So I feel like it skipped a generation. And so I'm at a generation now where I can learn the traditional manner, and then it's up to me to either continue it as is or contemporize it. And I felt through my artwork, I didn't stray away from the traditional as much, because I did initially start with the craft itself. I didn't start from an idea of like, oh, I think I have a general idea of it. I wanted to be like in the middle of it and understand everything that was happening, understand it from the region here, understand it from the neighboring region, understand it from a much wider historical narrative, because Sado is one of those crafts where it can share a lot of connections with other cultures and countries in the world throughout centuries, because it's using somewhat of the same tool, the loom. However, the different looms that exist, the different thread that is used, is such a wider conversation that if you just tackle it from a surface level, you won't notice it as much, but through contemporizing it, you would want to know how each one works and how can you navigate that conversation of bringing it into the modern conversation.
Okay, just before we finish, I want to ask if you can respond to this idea, because we're talking about contemporary and what it means to kind of take something that's traditional into a contemporary space. How would you define craft in relation to the idea that perhaps it's not as valued as perhaps some disciplines, such as, you know, if you were to see craft being defined as fine art, you know, what does that say to you? If you were to see craft being defined as low art, what does that say to you? What do you think, you know, like, where do you position craft in this contemporary space, knowing, as you have said, you know, what people often assume craft is versus what you've created?
I think for me, how I see it is the fact that crafts, it stems from a form of art. There is a way, there is a craftsmanship in it. I always see it as like, just like someone who can paint, they would pick up a brush, they would use their paint, whether it's natural paint that they can buy from the store, they have their canvas, they have a wall, they can do, there are so many different ways they can produce an artwork. The artisans have it too. They have their tools, they have their outcome. It just depends how they're gonna use it to produce an artwork out of it. And I hope that crafts are gonna be considered as something just as valuable, because artisans spend the same amount of time, maybe sometimes even more. It's not just something, there is mechanical or machine counterparts to them. However, the handmade is always, always, always more appreciated, because people can understand the significance that is behind a hand-woven or handmade piece. And I believe that craft, as the exhibition says, craft as a language, but also, to me, the most fascinating part about it is when you're sitting with an artisan, sometimes you don't even have to talk. You just talk through the craft itself. And it's something that's very beautiful, that I wish people see it more, and they don't just see the outcome, they see the process that happens, and maybe that hopefully can make people appreciate it more.
I think what was, interesting in terms of my process, because I do think from an artist perspective over a craft, it's like, you know, whatever like I give to the craft women, like it's already kind of interesting to her, because I'm trying to challenge the way that she does her weave. So it's always interesting to kind of have this conversation back and forth. And it's interesting because, like, you know, as craft women, they do practice things at a certain level, and like from an artist perspective, you do things from a different perspective. So together, like, you know, you make magic. So I feel like, you know, and we kind of, you know, we know how to graphic design. We know how to like do different ways of like how to kind of bring this craft in a different perspective that could be also interesting. So I think it's just the back and forth between like, you know, there's multiple craft women that I work with, but like every time that I try to kind of sketch something that is like crazy, it's always interesting to her, because it's not something that she has thought about. So I just love that we have this, you know, yeah.
In South Asia, before the British rule, there were no boundaries between art, design, and craft. I find that very interesting, but post the colonial rule, craft was something that became kind of more degraded in value. And personally, I feel it's been very challenging to take the practice forward as a collective. I think the easier way is to not talk about the makers or the craftsmen and just create works in collaboration with the studio. But the minute you kind of put a face to the maker and you put them next to you, it becomes very confusing for galleries. You know, they will then be like, okay, so this then is not quote unquote fine art. It's design or it's craft or, you know. So that is, although I personally don't see like, so my practice essentially and Studio Lael's practice, I would say, is about also blurring those boundaries between what is considered quote unquote contemporary fine art, what is design, what is craft, because I think we are all of those things. We're multidisciplinary. And the idea that art can also be, you know, created through a collaborative process and is very often, even in the mainstream contemporary art practice, created through collaborations, but then the artist does not talk about that collaboration so much because that's probably not what the gallery or the buyer wants to hear. They are just interested in the artist's name. So for me, it's also been about flipping that, you know, through the practice.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to the artists for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.